The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. This is John Spalding with Nexus for Change, and we have today's session, Cultural Competence for Professionals, an essential requirement for professionals in the global community. Our presenters today are Jerry Glover and Suzanne Sterling. More on them in a second. You can see that they have their cameras on and they are ready to roll with us today. I'm going to help you guys get your technology set up, make sure that we have everything that we need to get ready for the session. So first, that's the GoToWebinar control panel. You all have that. We can't see it on your screen for the presenters and panelists, but everyone has that, and you can see it has just different buttons that you can navigate to. So the first one we'll do is put your hand up and put your hand down. If you guys want to put your hands up, just to let me know that you're here, we'll say hello. And next, if you go into the chat window on your control panel and click that open, you'll see a welcome message that says, "Thank you for joining us on the webinar. Please go to this link for our chat room." And that is the http://tinyurl.com/SteveKD webinar. If you go there, that's where we're gonna be having our parallel conversation. This is just how we would typically set up a viewer, so you can have your GoToWebinar viewer on one side, and then on the other side you can have your chat room. We're only going to use the chat where we'll have an opportunity to use the chat room 5 times during the discussion, around 5 times. And then for the other times, there's a lot of polls and integrated discussion from Jerry and Suzanne, and so we're going to want to stay on topic and then use the chat rooms during the discussion points. So we have a couple poll questions that we're going to launch first, just to kind of see where everyone's at. And so the first one we'll do is, where do you live? And so we'll go ahead and launch the poll. Eastern United States, Western United States, Canada, Africa, or other, you can enter in the chat. We'll go ahead and give you 10 more seconds for the poll. And people that are pinging in, go ahead and welcome to the session. Go ahead and take the poll. And got a good percentage of you voting. We'll go ahead and close it and show where everyone's coming from. And so let's look at the results. We have Eastern United States 62%, Western United States 23%, Canada 8%, and other, they're going to be entering it in the chat, hopefully if they can have access, and they're at 8%. For those of you just joining, the chat room link is under the chat icon of the GoToWebinar control panel. And let's get our last intro poll. What's your professional area? Is it business, government, healthcare, consulting, or other? You can enter it in the chat there. What is your professional area? Go ahead and give 20 more seconds to get your responses in for this poll. All right, so we'll go ahead and close it. And then, as you guys can see the results, 7% are in business, 13% are in government, 7% are in healthcare, 47% are in consulting, and 27% are other. And they'll be entering it into the chat. So now I'm going to just go ahead and make sure we hand it back off to Kimberly Barker from the International Society for Organization Development and Change. Hi, Kimberly. How are you?
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. So you are going to introduce Jerry and Suzanne, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the organization that you represent. So why don't you go ahead and do their introductions, and then I'll bring up the slide for ISOD.
Okay. Thank you, John. On behalf of the International Society for Organization Development and Change, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. I would also like to encourage you to check out the ISODC. Membership benefits include free access to the OD Journal, the most widely cited OD journal in the world, access to OD newsletters, webinars such as this one, events, conferences, and other collaborative opportunities from all over the globe, special student opportunities that will sharpen your skills, friendship and support for both scholars and practitioners in a collegial environment that will strengthen your practice. For more information, please go to isodc.org. I would like to introduce our presenters today. Jerry Glover is a cultural anthropologist who has worked in consulting, research, and education projects around the globe. Dr. Glover is a board member of the International Society for Organization Development and Change and a peer review editor for the Organization Development Journal. He has been a faculty member of the graduate program in organizational change at Hawaii Pacific University for 27 years. He earned his doctoral degree in cultural anthropology from the University of Florida. Dr. Glover's professional career includes working as a consultant on 150 change projects and development initiatives, including corporations, government, and professional applications such as education, healthcare, military, tourism, and economic development. He has developed initiatives for transcultural competence, education, and training in locations such as Fiji, New Zealand, Hawaii, the Bahamas, Europe, and North America. He has conducted extensive research on organizational culture, culture change, and cultural dilemmas in socio-cultural encounters. Suzanne Sterling is recognized for her work in bringing people together and helping them to reconcile differences. She is a consultant in the area of cultural competency, organization and systems change, and nonprofit governance and operations. Suzanne is the Canadian affiliate and at the Institute for Cultural and Adaptive Leadership and holds a Master of Arts in Organizational Change. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, so without further ado, Jerry, let's get started with today's session.
Okay.
And did you get the notification to be the presenter?
I'm sorry?
Did you get the notification to be the presenter?
Yes, hold on just a sec.
Okay.
Is my screen on now?
And now it's on, yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. All right. What I'm going to do is to try to go through material that we have in about an hour because we do have a limited time. And hopefully we'll be able to stimulate interest in some of these ideas, and we're quite willing to have outside conversations beyond this with anyone who wants to. We're interested very much in the area. And basically this is a webinar, as you can see, for people who are interested in navigating cultural differences. Suzanne and I are doing most of the presentation. We also have John, of course, helping us, Graham Isaacs, Rebecca Miner, and of course Kim Barker. And they'll be working with you, particularly Rebecca Miner, in the chat room, and will help to bring questions forward for us to answer at particular times during the session. The people who are participating today, we want to thank all of you. Many people are participating for different reasons. Some people may be wanting to learn more about a book that we put out last year with the American Psychological Association entitled Cultural Competence, Navigating Cultural Differences. Some are interested in just in general learning more about culture, and some are planning to take an online course that we're starting on Monday with Florida Institute of Technology called ICCM 105, Navigating Cultural Differences. And then Some are attending because they're my friends and they know they have to answer to me if they don't attend. We also, basically, we have a variety of good participants from different professions, and so let's have a good session. Okay. Mentioning the book before, this is the book I was referring to. If you haven't seen it, that's what I was referring to. The course that we talked about that is starting on Monday is a course that will follow much of what we might talk about in this session today. If anyone's interested in it, we have a session starting on Monday. We have a limited number of scholarships that are still available because it's the first time we've offered it. We're able to, through the cooperation of Florida Institute of Technology, to cover the costs of anyone's tuition and book costs. If you are interested in doing something like that, contact either Suzanne Sterling or me, certainly as soon as possible, because as I said, we only have a limited number of them, and we've had quite a big interest in it. Basically, it means it's an online course that you can take for free, and you also get a copy of the book. That course that we're talking about starting Monday is this one. It's the core course in a certificate that we're offering. This also is accompanied by future courses: one, teams in collaboration, reconciling cultural differences, the process of creating change through reconciling differences, of course, on organizational culture, and one on culture change. This is a certificate offered through the Continuing Education Department and the Institute for Cross Cultural Management at Florida Institute of Technology. And anyone who has an interest in knowing more about it, we'd be happy to have a discussion about it with you outside of the webinar, because obviously there's a lot of things that we could discuss. How are the courses that we just mentioned different from online courses? Many of you have been made to take courses or had to take courses or taken courses that are online, and my biggest pet peeve is the course that I'm forced to take at various universities and places where I've been a faculty member, and it was just a set of narrated slides with a few quizzes in between the narrated slides. That's not what we're talking about when we say an online course. We basically are setting up these courses that we're offering, including the one on Monday, of course, as engaging and interactive. We're using cases, a couple of the cases you'll see in here today. We're also using threaded discussions where different participants in the course will be able to discuss the cases and other issues. We have some videos that you can see, and we use a very simple framework based on a model from Trompenaars, Hans Trompenaars, who I've worked with for 20 years. We also use cultural dilemmas, which you'll see examples of, and what we call social cultural encounters. Social cultural encounters is a big social science word for the fact that when people come into contact with one another, their social cultural backgrounds then become present and may well influence the encounter. And so we think this approach is understandable and easy to use, and we think you'd find at least a sample of that approach in the meeting today. In that courses, we'll also have Zoom meetings that are optional if anyone would like to discuss aspects of the course. So it's very engaging, very interactive, and not the typical narrated slides. So anyway, on to what we're going to talk about today. Culture, of course, is influences a number of things. As you can see, we have been influenced ourselves by the work of people like Clyde Kluckholm, Talcott Parsons, Edward Hall, Hosted, Shine, Hampton Turner, Williams, and Trompenaars. So we want to acknowledge that those people probably came up with a lot of this stuff before we did. So if you see things that look familiar, it's because we want to let you know that we've taken, as everyone else does, a lot of things from these great contributors to the field. What is culture? It's what makes us human. I think, in my own experience, if someone who's worked with the concept for a number of years, we use the term frequently, but it's often misunderstood. Culture influences everything we do. It's not a side dish. It's the main course. And whether it's dealing with organizational strategy or leadership or customer service or whatever, you'll always find culture to be a factor there. And culture is, of course, learned pattern behavior, and it has an impact in groups, organizations, communities, and nations. One of the key concepts that I wanted to just mention briefly is one of the reasons why we're dealing with so much diversity today is that we now have more social complexity than we did as earlier humans. When we had societies that were primarily homogeneous, the values were not diverse, but as we've added heterogeneous societies, we find, of course, the challenge of dealing with the heterogeneity and the differences is a reason why we have to be concerned with cultural differences. Okay, and of course, culture is expressed in many forms, as you can see. I won't read them to you. You can see. If anyone wants a copy of the slides, of course, we're going to send them to them. I have a question slide for you. Which one of these is the cost of not being culturally competent? And the first one's failed overseas assignments. People are sent overseas and then come back early or are ineffective when they go on assignments. Workplace conflict can be generated through labor management relations. It could be ethnic conflict. It could be any number of issues between professional groups. There's often as you'll see in the case later on, there are cultural differences between functional groups. Unhappy tourists and guests that are not happy with the product that they've come to experience. Non-compliant healthcare patients who don't comply because of their own beliefs about healthcare, and they don't comply with the Western trained physicians and medical staff. Technology not integrated into service products, where we find that the technology is not complementary to the social system that it's in. Ineffective teams, both virtual and real teams, and of course leadership that doesn't fit followers. And accidents due to the failure to question leaders. There are examples, for example, in airplane cockpits where the co-pilot failed to question the authority of the pilot and resulting in accidents. That was an descriptive versus achievement values dilemma. But anyway, which ones are not? Which ones are related to the costs of not being culturally competent? All of them. So we can probably think of a lot more if we had time. But just keep that in mind, that we're dealing with something that costs businesses and organizations and communities and groups constantly because of the failure of people to be able to be culturally competent. Some of the other examples of culture being misunderstood, U.S. motivation research for years has been based on individual and achievement values, and when it moves outside of the small parameters of U.S. Universities and selected groups, it no longer works. Many people operate on their group values and ascriptive values. Performance management systems are often developed, for example, in the U.S. and then sent out to other countries, only to find that people didn't want to be put into that type of individual-based ascriptive system. Technology I mentioned a minute ago, gift giving in many countries and many cultures is considered the way you do business. So you have to deal with it. And of course, back in the U.S., it's often seen as corruption. And so it's a dilemma that has to be met by any of you who've worked internationally know what I'm talking about. Contracts that often are not based on relationships, and time and agendas not fitting the local expectations. We have cases that are going to illustrate some of these things as we go through. So cultural competence is a necessary skill. It's something that's very important. It has not just international implications, but it also has domestic implications as well. And has all sorts of implications for leadership and professional development. So I would ask you to pause for a second here and look at these 4 stages of cultural competency. The first stage is when we learn our own culture as an infant, and developing our knowledge of our own culture is critical. Then the second stage is encountering other humans who don't have the same cultural orientations. That's the first time we start developing beyond our own culture. Stage 3 is multicultural competence, operating when crossing multicultural boundaries. And that's very important, and often is the subject of a lot of training and books and work in the area, and it's very important. But it may involve learning a culture in depth, or it may involve learning how to operate in specific assignments. The fourth area is what we focus on, and that's being able to adapt to social culture situations anywhere with or without the prior knowledge of the specific cultural context. Now, we realize it's very important to know the cultural context, so we're not saying that. What we're saying is there are certain things that you can learn that enable you to be effective, even if you aren't an expert in that particular cultural setting that you're in. Okay? So that's basically our introduction to what we're doing. And to get us into the whole context of what we want to talk about, I want to show you a case that we developed from our experience in working with the military. We had a project whereby we were...
Jerry?
Yep, sorry? Yep.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I was going to say make sure you have it in presentation mode, but it looks like you do, so thanks.
Yeah, I've got it actually in the read mode. Okay, and so we actually did this work with the DOMI and the Department of Defense several years ago, where we interviewed and focus groups a number of people who had been on overseas assignments in the military. And this particular case is one that is one of my favorites because it presents such a compelling dilemma. So let me read it. Let me go through the case with you, and then we'll talk about it. We had some soldiers who told us of this particular situation where they were visiting a local village, and that the region was, of course, an area that was occupied by insurgents, and they were trying to visit the village to win the goodwill of the local village and the elders. Incidentally, there were weapons in the village or near the village that they were suspected were there, and they were hoping to find out more about it. Okay, the soldiers entered with an interpreter, and when they, as many situations there, they sat down on the floor to face the elders. One of the elders offered the hookah pipe to them as a genuine gesture of hospitality. And the interpreter that was with them explained to be insulted if they refused to participate. The soldiers in the situation looked at one another to see what they needed to do. And of course, one of the important values there is that smoking hashish is against the U.S. military law, so that's obviously important. One of the soldiers whispered and said they should smoke, and of course the military regulations is the other one. Of course, the interpreter is saying, well, be insulting the elders if you don't. So they go to the process of deciding what they have to do. The elder was getting impatient, and the soldiers had to make a decision. Okay, and and it presented a dilemma, what we call a cultural dilemma. If they were to smoke and accept the hospitality of the villagers, the elders, obviously that had some advantages. If they were to refuse and possibly offend the elders, that also had some advantages and disadvantages. The polling question we have for you now is, what would you do in this situation? John?
Yep, and so you just select one of the following. Do you smoke and accept the hospitality, or do you refuse and possibly offend the elders whom you want to build the relationship? So about 44% of you voted so far. Let's give it 20 more seconds, and then we'll reveal the results and close the poll. All right, any last-minute votes for this case? What would you do in this dilemma? Get them in there. All right, Jerry and Suzanne, so here's what we have. In this cultural dilemma, it looks like 76% of people on this session would smoke and accept the hospitality, and 24% would refuse to do that, possibly offending the elders
Okay. All right. The different responses mean something, and it indicates what your values are in terms of one cultural dimension, and that is the idea of universal particular values. Are you universally applying what you know from home and back in the U.S., or are you doing what the Romans do? Are you doing something in the situation you're in that's culturally appropriate there, but not appropriate in your own culture? And that's a very important factor, particularly when people cross cultural boundaries that they have to deal with. In this particular situation, I asked the soldiers what they did. The ones that had reported the story to me said they sat and smoked. And they said as they were beginning to leave the meeting a couple hours later, that one of the elders followed them out to the door and said to them, by the way, you should look in the field over there. You may find what you're looking for. And apparently they have never discussed that information with the elders. They just simply tried to build rapport and share hospitality. So it gives you an indication of they felt very comfortable with what they did. However, we found that other people were much more comfortable with the idea that they should not smoke and find some way to make excuses with the elders that would hopefully not embarrass them and not cause the elders to feel they'd lost their hospitality. So it is a very important issue, and it's very important too when the soldiers were to go back to their base as to how their commander might see it. And these are the kind of common problems that people like these soldiers were facing, that operationally there were certain things that people said, well, we should do that. But on the other hand, the policies and the legal system and the values of the U.S. military didn't support the idea. Just one more thing on this particular story. When it got to the people in Washington that were looking at this dilemma that we had elicited, because we elicited a bunch of dilemmas and sent them up, many people were saying, well, you have to tell them what the right answer is. And of course, the problem is for the soldiers sitting in that situation, there's really not a right answer. It's a matter of what's going to fit their situation, and them being aware of their own values and being aware of the consequences of making decisions on both ends of that particular universal particular spectrum. Now we have built in just a minute at the beginning of each part for questions. Does anyone, Rebecca, or anyone from the chat room have anything that someone's raised or any discussion, or could we move on?
Martha was just brought up a point about that we shouldn't assume that it was hookah, but I did reply to Miss Martha. I understand they reported it as being hashish, right, when they spoke with you?
I'm sorry, I wasn't hearing your question. I mean, your segment.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, Miss Martha brought up a point about the hashish, but I understand that they told you it was hashish. They knew that it was hashish, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could have been it wasn't, but they assumed it was.
They assumed it was, yeah.
And apparently it was after they went ahead and did it. So.
Right.
Yeah. So it's one of those variables they had to make that decision on the spot. So
just have to gamble with it just to be on the safe side.
Of course, what happened is they may have saved some lives by finding those weapons. Was their explanation? They felt like it was justified. They said if we can save lives by participating with the elders, then it was worthwhile. I had a similar situation in Fiji in a gold mine strike that I was a consultant in, and I went out and sat with the Fijian chiefs and drank Yangon and Kava for a couple hours just to build a rapport and get them to come in and try to settle the strike. So it's not just there. It could also be a Japanese tea ceremony. It could be having beer with someone in Los Angeles. It's the whole idea of meetings involve hospitality, and when you refuse it, you tend to run the risk of alienating people. Any other comments or questions?
Let's see. Dr. Bourget had mentioned that they were asked to eat or drink things that they're allergic to, and I had the same situation as a non-smoker in Bahrain, having to to smoke hookah before. It was difficult for the 3.5 years over there, but I didn't like to refuse because then it changed the whole mood of the room if you did.
Yes,
You know.
yes, very much so. That's a good point. Okay, I'm going to move on just because of time, because we have some other cases I want to show you in a minute. I'm going to move through this relatively quickly. Let me say that our system is based on some fundamental things, the 7 dimensions of the culture, which I give you an illustration of one, the socio-cultural encounters being the linking pin for being able to integrate into various cultures and identify what are the key socio-cultural encounters involving meetings or maybe involving management or negotiations or fundamental social aspects, okay? And of course we're using a concept called the cultural dilemmas, which Hampton Turner and Tropinars developed. And then we have a system I'm going to show you in a few minutes of a process for how to deal with cultural differences, recognition, respect, reconciliation, resolution. Okay, most of you, if you've done anything in the area, know the onion model by Shine, and of course I just wanted to basically show it to you. Culture is a phenomenon that has basic assumptions and then norms and artifacts and values that are more like the rings of an onion. Okay. Why do we use cultural values? Because cultural values allow us to focus in on and go into any culture and use those dimensions to identify where people might be in the values. And I've mentioned most of this to you, so I'm going to go on. What's important, I think, in the study of culture is to think about the range of human variation. In a situation like individual collective, people can be at the very one edge of individualism, and they can be at the other end of collectivism. But beyond those two opposite ranges, there are no other behaviors. So it's important to realize why we use the cultural dimensions, Tropinars and others. The universal particular I just mentioned to you, rules of relationships, individual collective, self or society, achievement ascription, like the cockpit situation I talked about, are specific or diffuse. Are you limited in the way you deal with people? Or are you open? Emotion or no emotion, synchronic and sequential, that has to do with time, and internal, external. Do we have control of our own environment, or does the environment control us? And that's very important in environmental issues. And we mentioned the 4 steps of reconciling, which we'll come back to. And I mentioned before the increase in heterogeneity, very important to understanding cultural diversity. Now, what are some illustrations of where you look for dilemmas and sociocultural encounters that might create dilemmas? Meetings, negotiations, status, technology, guest host encounters, media, agreements and contracts, product design and marketing. There's many, many areas to look into, and you'll see that there are indeed potential for cultural dilemmas there. Cultural dilemmas can occur at different levels, the interpersonal level, at the group and project team, and at the organizational level. And what are some situations that can come up? Rules versus centralized rules versus decentralized rules, like HR departments in the U.S. putting together a policy and seeing it out around the world and expecting it to be the norm for everyone. Individual versus group motivators, efficiency effectiveness, which is one of the key value sets in the quality movement of the 80s and 90s, is very much a factor. And you can see, of course, linear thinking, loop thinking, tradition versus future thinking. So dilemmas have to do with a lot of things, but most importantly, they have to do with things that are important to us. And if we look at the whole concept of the environment versus industry, it's a common dilemma that people bring up. People on both sides have their own hard-to-test values, when it becomes my values versus your values. What we're really looking for in our methodology is not my values or your values, but how can we find ways to create a new way of doing things, which is called reconciliation. And that's creative problem solving, creative thinking, or whatever you might want to call it. But it's at the essence of why we identify dilemmas, because when we have a dilemma, we have someone on that side, someone on that side. If we're going to try to get resolution, we're going to try to find the 10-10 solution out here. We might end up with apathy, which is one of the most common responses to problems in organizations, because it's a survival strategy. Compromise means that only basically no one really wins. Both have to give up something, and that happens commonly in labor disputes. Okay, that's our methodology in a nutshell. Sorry I went through it so quickly, but I want to go to some cases which will illustrate more of what we're talking about. So anyone have a question right now at where we are?
Kim offered a question. How can we rebound from a situation of cultural intolerance? What can one do when it is clear that this has happened?
How can we rebound from, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
How can we rebound from a situation of cultural intolerance? What can one do when it is clear that it has happened? I can say in Japan one time, my husband had to actually deal with that person afterwards because I inadvertently, being Australian, I guess I said the wrong thing. So I learned my lesson that time. But I'm not sure how you would rebound, actually.
Well, I think we're talking about how we control our own behaviors in cross-cultural situations. Most people that I've encountered and worked with respect the fact that you're trying, and that they respect the fact that you are going out of your way not to try to impose your own set of values on them, and that you're listening to them and trying to hear what they have to say. I'm reminded of in Fiji, once we were doing some training at a hotel, and I was sitting with a group of Fijian managers around a kapa bowl ceremony, Yangona, which is what they normally do at the end of a session. They have what they call a wash down, where after we've gone through all the lecturing and stuff from the outside consultants or the internal consultants or whatever, they all sit around and discuss what went on during the day and have probably more learning going on there than they do anywhere else. But I remember once that they had brought a trainer up from New Zealand, this hotel company, and at the end of the day, I was there representing the executive group to see how things are going, and the trainer had done a session on certain service methods, and at the end of the day, they were always sitting around to have the wash down with the Yangona, and they invited her to join. And she said, "Oh, no, I'm too busy. I don't have time for that kind of foolishness." And I can guarantee you no one really participated in any of her stuff the rest of the week. So it's a classic case of intolerance on the part of the trainer, and not realizing that what she did in that session was important, but it would not get through to the people there unless she was able to build some rapport and respect their culture. Okay. All right. Well, anything else?
No.
All right. I'm going to move on then, and then when we get done, we'll have time for any more discussion if you want. Just a reminder, just a reminder, 7 dimensions. If you're interested in 7 dimensions, there's plenty of sources out there. Certainly, we cover them in our book. Fun Strumpiners has about 10 publications and books with them in it. Most of these are fairly well used. Of course, Gerd Husted uses other dilemmas, but other dimensions. It's not so important which dimension you're using. It's important, though, that you're using something that allows you to measure and assess culture and fits within that range of human variation. Okay, I'm going to give you a case, and we're going to do some more polling here, so hopefully you won't...
And let's use, remember to use presentation mode, Jerry.
What's that?
Remember to use presentation mode.
Yeah, I was leaving it on the side so I could refer to them, but that's fine. Okay.
Oh, gotcha, okay. Fine.
All right, so basically the story, these are all true stories, by the way. We were working with an insurance company that in which the executive committee was talking about a customer that was the local councilman and come in and talk to a salesperson in one of the offices and wanted to know if they could get a exception on the loan amount on the policy. Well, somehow this got into a sort of a discussion between the functional areas in the company, and it ended up getting to the executive committee. And I was sitting in a meeting when they were talking about it, and I pointed out to them this was a classic dilemma of different values. And when they started talking about the idea of the policyholder getting an exception to the policy, it's interesting because we had just done a cultural survey of the company, and we found that that was one of the questions we put in there because of it coming up and being a very, very important thing. But it turns out that the chief financial officer, as well as all the accounting people, had said no, you shouldn't provide exceptions to the policy. And interestingly enough, the VP for sales at the executive committee and in the survey, all the sales and marketing people had said you do whatever it takes to exceed the customer's expectations. A classic cultural dilemma between functional areas in the same company. That was important to discuss at the executive committee. But what was really important is I pointed out to them that they had just created a value statement and a mission statement, and we're quite proud of it. They had it in a banner behind them in the meeting room, and it said, "We strive to be the leader in our business and exceed our customers' expectations." And I pointed out to the executive committee that if they're exceeding their customers' expectation, how does that impact on the daily operational practice of issues like the one that they were discussing, the granting the exception to the policy or not granting the exception to the policy. And the interesting thing is, this was once again a universal particular values situation. But both sides have consequences. You can't give away the store on the one hand, but on the other hand, you have to have policies, particularly in an insurance company and on practices. But on the other hand, this was a very influential and important customer. So what do they do? Okay? And so what it illustrates is what we would call a dilemma, once again, that on the one hand, you can't exceed the amount and need to follow the rules. Giving in to such requests will lead to business losses and potential financial difficulties. Whereas, on the other hand, we state in our vision and values will exceed our customers' expectations. And we must find ways to make our customers happy that they'll continue to pay their premiums. So what I think we want to do now is ask you, what would you do? What would you say? John, I'll give it to you.
Yes, thanks, Jerry. And people are already voting. So should we provide a policy loan to exceed the permitted amount? Do we provide the loan as an exception to the limit, or do we not exceed the policy loan limits? And so 32% of you voted already. Let's go ahead and give you 20 more seconds to finish those up. We'll do 10 more seconds to get the last couple of votes in terms of how you would handle the dilemma. Would you provide the loan as an exception to the policy limit, or would you choose to not exceed the policy loan limits? If this were a decision that was up to you. All right, so we'll go ahead and close the poll. And as you can see, Jerry, 71% said they would provide the loan as an exception to the limit, and 29% said that they would not exceed the policy limits.
Okay. I think one of the things I'd like for all of you who worked in corporations to do is to think about how that would go down in a lot of companies, particularly those who are very interested in maintaining strict financial and rigid policies on it. But it's a very real dilemma. Why? Because it brings up two things. It brings up the fact that making exceptions operationally to things like this do involve values, and the values are functionally based. Accounting people have different values than sales and marketing people. And it's quite common to find that even academic disciplines have different values about things. So the dilemma is not only at the operational level, but it's also at the level between the vision and mission and the day-to-day practices in the company. And I've challenged most companies, if they were to try to go and find ways to identify key dilemmas like this and see if they were fitting the vision and mission, the chances are that probably many of them would not be. Okay, so let me move on. A case of from a rural health clinic treating migrant workers. Actually came from a place where I used to be on the board of a rural health clinic in Florida. What was happening is the doctors were trained in Western medicine, but they seemed to show little regard for the cultural beliefs and the language of the migrants. And a nurse that I was working with and talked to there approached the issue and was told just to stay within her position. Of course, the real question here is, does the nurse continue to insist that the doctors learn about some of the values and beliefs of the patients, of the clients who had very different belief systems about health and well-being, and should they try to educate the doctors about this and continue to insist that they be more aware of it, or should they just let things go and realize that the migrants will revert to their own medical beliefs when they're ill? That was a classic dilemma from my days as a board member at a migrant clinic. Now the question would be here, which is a description achievement thing, and as many of you know of the cultural differences between medical doctors and nursing and staff and administration in healthcare facilities. There have been books written about the cultures of healthcare facilities and the descriptive power differences that go on. But what would you do in this situation? Do you tell the doctors they need to better understand the culture of the patients, or do you not risk insulting them by telling them how to do their jobs? In other words, should you interfere or should you not? What would you do?
Yep, and those are, so go ahead and put those in now, everyone. We'll give you about 10 more seconds to vote. Half of you have already voted. So 10 more seconds for those of you who might still be getting in your answer. So with respect to the status of doctors or risk offending them by explaining that they are the source, do you tell them that they need to better understand the patient's culture, or do you not? Or do not risk insulting the doctors by telling them their job? All right, Jerry, so I'm going to close the poll and share the 100% said that they would tell the doctors that they need to better understand the patient's culture.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, well, I'm going to move on from that one because that's obviously a classic description achievement situation, and it comes up a lot of times, not only in healthcare but in a lot of organizations. Do you risk telling the people who have more power than you in an organization about critical dilemmas? Sorry. I've only got a few more minutes, so this one's regarding time and showing up on time. I'm going to skip that one, and I will go to another one so that we can get the ones in that I want. It's basically about a mayor showing up late for meetings, and it's one of those things that people commonly encounter regarding time and the synchronic versus sequential values. Okay. This was an interesting one that came from my work when I used to work for the Bahamas government. We were getting negative comments in an exit survey given to tourists as they were leaving the country, and they were told that the front desk staff is frequently mentioned by the visitors as they left. The front desk staff was rude and unfriendly. Upon further investigation, we looked into it more and found that the answer was quite simple, and it was fairly cultural in nature. The people, as they were raised in the Bahamas, were told not to look at their parents when they're being scolded. The visitors, mainly from the U.S., were taught to look at their parent when they're scolding. In other words, child, look at me when I'm talking to you, or child, don't look at me when I'm talking to you, depending on which culture you're being raised in. And the interesting thing is, once we were identified what was causing the problem, then we knew that we had to somehow change the perceptions of the visitors, or change the perceptions of the front desk staff, because do you leave the tourists to learn more about the culture, or do you want the guests, the front desk staff, rather, to learn not to turn away and avoid eye conflict? This was a very big problem. Okay, I'll let you look at that. What would you do? Train the local staff to correct their behavior for the tourists, or would you educate the tourists on the behaviors and the culture of the local staff? Would you try to make it a cultural thing, in other words, or would you try to just use it as corrective behavior, if you will, on the part of for the staff?
And we have about 45% voted, Jerry, so we'll give them another 20 seconds to get their votes in on this one. All right, go ahead and get your last-minute votes in there. I should say last-second votes.
Yeah, because we're hurrying.
All right, so let's see what we got. And so, Jerry, we have 71% said that they would train the local staff to correct their behavior for the tourists, and 29% would educate the tourists on the behaviors and culture of the local staff.
Okay. What we actually did was both. Okay. And so we felt like it was important to do both, because we felt like there was a great advantage by letting the tourists know a little something about the locals, and we found ways to educate them about the tourists, or what we called a sense of place. And also we try to let the staff know why they were getting such negative results when they would turn and look away when someone was yelling at them. And of course, the front desk was where many people came with complaints. Okay, I'm going to move on. I think that's all we're going to look at. Hopefully you get the idea. This one had to do with a cruise ship company that I worked with, in which the cruise ship company was so successful that they were actually damaging the reefs in the area because they were dropping so many anchors. And the dilemma was, do you continue the cruise ship because it's so successful and have more cruises and run the risk of damaging the environment that people were coming there to see, or do you try to preserve the product and cancel the cruises and not have more cruises? That's the fundamental dilemma. And of course, what happened was it was set up that if you stop the cruises and save the reefs, you damage other things like the local economy and the success of the company and so forth. And if, on the other hand, you continue to grow the cruises, you may well end up destroying the thing that people are coming there to see anyway. This actually came from the Osawa Islands in the South Pacific, and it was the same area where they filmed Castaway with Tom Hanks, and also the movie, what was one of the Brooke Shields and Krista Aiken? Long time ago. Blue Lagoon. Yeah. Okay. So it's a real story too. Have anyone polling on that one?
Yeah, I did. Just for the heck of it, I'll go ahead and close it now. But 33% have voted. So just to kind of share the results real quick, at that point, 63% said they would stop the cruises and save the reefs. 38% they would continue to grow the cruises and build the economy.
Okay, great. All right, now just we're going to have a discussion in just a minute. I want to move on to the last part here, and then we'll have time for anyone to ask questions, which I've been trying to make sure we do have that time. Okay, so basically we have conditions for a study of cultures. It should be apparent cultural relativity, being able to think holistically and avoid biases, and the whole issue of cultural relativity versus ethnocentric is extremely important. Being able to look past and future and global and local. Holistic thinking, being able to see the integration of all of the things at the same time. And using social cultural encounters as a way to make sense out of culture. Okay, we'll open it up for some questions. I think we have about 7 minutes to spend, and so do we have any questions or comments? Or keep in mind that what we try to do is give you a taste of some of the things we're doing, and some of the content of not only the book I showed you up front, but also the course that we're offering beginning on Monday at FIT, and also of many of the things that that people involved with the study of culture are interested in. So I'll leave it up to you for questions.
No, there's nothing coming in quite yet. However, Dr. Bourget did mention that they would have the ship drop anchor where no reefs are damaged, but at the same time educate the captains and navigators regarding your.
Yeah, that's a good answer, because what we ended up coming up with a solution to that dilemma was we talked about putting in mooring buoys, where they would be a mooring buoys situated outside the reef, and the ships would come in and tie to the mooring buoy rather than drop anchors, and that seemed to work out pretty well. So, okay, good comment. Any other comments?
Not at the moment.
I have one, Jerry. I actually have a couple. Martha Martin said that she can see some relevance from the first case to the MTBI battery, and you know what? I just lost the line where she said it, because everyone's entering in the chat room, so there's a lot of stuff. And Mel, I'll come back to that one. So Mel said major cultural differences can be reflected between the Democratic and Republican presidential candidates.
Yes.
I don't know if we can't go a webinar nowadays without having that brought up. So Mel did say that.
Well, there are indeed differences within the parties as well.
So yeah, in the case, I think it was the insurance company that said the sales would make the exception, and she was relating it back to the MBTI or the DISC. Sales would make the exception, and then C, the finance folks would keep the letter of the law. So she said maybe in the different positions and on your different personalities, you might choose differently.
Yeah, very much so, and that's really a reflection of the cultural values of those functional areas that match the basic way that people do business. I've said in executive committees where it was like a United Nations in terms of cultural differences between the operations people and the accounting people and the HR people and the marketing people and so forth. So.
CPA and the legal implications of them having hookah as an illegal substance just really
and that's
made
once
life
again
difficult for them.
a great illustration. I was going to do something, John. Give me my slide back for a second.
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second.
Yeah. Okay. Hold on. Here. We wanted to. Oh, sorry. I'll show my screen. Hold on. Okay. Can you see it now? Get my screen now?
Yep.
Okay. Just wanted to thank everyone and to let them have my email address and Suzanne's email address as well. If you want to follow up with any kind of comment, discussion, we love to talk about this stuff. I've done this stuff my whole life, so I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone. We can do it by email or by Skype call or by Zoom if we have enough of us. So if we've stimulated some conversation, that's great. Also, reminding you, if this kind of stuff interests you, we're going to be going into a lot of this, a lot of the cases. Our cases are the the focal point of learning in these courses that we're offering at FIT. And you see the cost. That cost, if you get in your form, if you talk to us now, we can give one of the scholarships that FIT is granted, and it costs nothing. And you also get a copy of the book for free. So if you have an interest in that course, it's an online course, but it doesn't require you to be in there at any one particular time. We're happy to have you in there, and we'd love to get more participation from different people. And you saw the email addresses. Okay. Okay, John, all yours with 1 minute to go.
All right, thanks, Jerry. No problem. So I just want to thank you again, and Suzanne and Rebecca and Graham and Kim for being here today, for monitoring the chat room, for everybody that participated. You guys did a great job, and thank you, especially Jerry and Suzanne, for putting together a great presentation, very informative and very engaging. So as for next steps, you can see that a recording for this session for everyone who was here, the Nexus slides, and a PDF copy of Jerry's slides will be coming out to you in the next 2 days, as well as a recording link for the session. So as you're leaving, just give us a bumper sticker or just check out. What were your key takeaways from the session? We do copy and paste the chat room discussion in there. And then at the end, you'll get a survey, so just take the survey. In GoToWebinar, it'll say send us feedback. Go ahead and click that button and take the survey to give Jerry and Suzanne some feedback on their session, but also on what we can do at Nexus for Change to continue to create engaging webinar series for you guys. The link for the registering for the Navigating Cultural Differences course is in there right here, so this will go out with your presentation. Just click on that link and you'll go there. And then we will get a link in there for joining Suzanne Sterling online, and then sending out the email addresses for Jerry and Suzanne as follow-up. So again, thanks everybody for coming to the Cultural Competence for Professionals webinar provided by Nexus for Change and the International Society for Organization Development and Change and the Institute for Cross-Cultural Management at the Florida Institute of Technology. Thank you all for being here. Jerry, Suzanne, everybody over there, thank you very much.
Thanks to everyone for being on board and participating, and hopefully we can have a dialogue about your own experiences with dilemmas in the future.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks everyone. And closing words from Vivian that says thank you so much for an excellent presentation. I think we will go out on that note. Thanks everyone.